Welcome to Dreamtale Sleep Stories. Tonight's reading is The Samurai Who Became a Noodle Master. Settle into your bed or sofa and let your shoulders, jaw, and eyelids grow heavy. Inhale slowly, 1, 2, 3, and sigh the air away, allowing the day to fade into quiet dark. With every soft inhale, you invite fresh English phrases. With every gentle exhale, stray thoughts drift farther off. Behind my voice flows a gentle theta wave melody, renowned for guiding the mind toward deep relaxation. Soon, the music will shift into soothing alpha wave tones, carrying you toward a calm shoreline of dreams. Keep your eyes closed or follow the captions, whichever feels right. Simply receive the rhythm and resonance of the language. Deep in rest, tonight's phrases will take root like seeds, ready to bloom into stronger English skills with the morning light. When you feel settled, hold that unhurried breath and allow yourself to drift into the tale. The Samurai Who Became a Noodle Master begins now. And when the story's final line has faded, the music will linger a little longer, carrying you gently deeper into sleep. The Samurai Who Became a Noodle Master. Kenji Yamamoto had always believed that his sword was his soul. For 23 years, he had served the Matsudaira clan as a loyal retainer, practicing his swordsmanship every dawn and studying military strategy until late into the night. His modest stipend of rice allowed him to live simply but with dignity in a small house near Edo Castle. However, the winds of change were beginning to blow across Japan, and even the most dedicated samurai could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Kenji knelt in his tiny garden, performing his daily meditation before the small shrine dedicated to his ancestors. The cherry blossoms had begun to fall, carpeting the ground with pale pink petals that reminded him of the impermanence of all things. As he opened his eyes, he noticed his neighbor, Taro the carpenter, already at work in his yard, the rhythmic sound of his hammer creating a steady beat that somehow brought peace to Kenji's troubled mind. "Good morning, Yamamoto-san," Taro called out, pausing in his work. "You're up early again. The way of the warrior requires discipline in all things," Kenji replied automatically, though lately he had begun to question what purpose this discipline served. When Kenji arrived at the clan house that morning, he found his fellow retainers gathered in the main hall, their faces grim. Lord Matsudaira himself stood before them, his usually composed features showing signs of strain. The Lord was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of difficult decisions. "My loyal retainers," Lord Matsudaira began, his hands clasped behind his back. "The times are changing faster than any of us anticipated. The shogun's power weakens daily, and there are rumors that the emperor himself may soon reclaim direct rule over Japan. In these uncertain times, I must make difficult choices to ensure the survival of our clan." Kenji felt his stomach tighten. He had heard whispers in the streets of Edo about political upheaval, but he had hoped that his lord would weather the storm as the Matsudaira clan had done for generations. Effective immediately, I must reduce the number of retainers in my service by half. The Lord continued, "Those of you who have served faithfully will receive a modest severance payment, but I can no longer guarantee your positions or your stipends." The hall fell silent, except for the sound of men trying to control their breathing. Kenji stared at the tatami mats beneath his knees, processing the implications of what he had just heard. Without his position, he had no income, no rice allowance, and no clear path forward. At 23, he was young enough to start over, but old enough to understand how difficult that would be. "Yamamoto Kenji," Lord Matsudaira called out. Kenji looked up, hoping against hope that his name was being called for a different reason. "You have served our clan with honor and dedication," the Lord said. "Your swordsmanship is excellent, and your character is beyond reproach. If circumstances were different, I would keep you by my side without hesitation. Please accept this small token of my gratitude for your years of service." Lord Matsudaira held out a small silk pouch that Kenji knew contained a few gold coins, enough to live on for perhaps 2 months if he was extremely careful. Kenji bowed deeply, accepting the payment with as much dignity as he could maintain. "Thank you for your kindness, my lord," he said. "May fortune favor the Matsudaira clan in these troubled times." As Kenji walked through the streets of Edo that afternoon, the familiar sights and sounds seemed different somehow. The merchants calling out their wares, the children playing in the narrow alleys, the smell of cooking food wafting from countless small restaurants. All of it felt like a world he was seeing for the first time. For years, he had moved through these streets with purpose, knowing his place in the rigid hierarchy of Japanese society. Now, he was just another person without clear direction. He found himself standing before a small soba shop called Crane's Rest, watching through the open front as the proprietor worked behind a wooden counter. The man was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair tied back in a simple top knot, and hands that moved with practiced precision as he kneaded buckwheat dough. There was something mesmerizing about the rhythm of his work. Fold, press, turn. Fold, press, turn. An endless cycle that seemed to require total concentration and years of experience to master. "Admiring Masa's technique?" a voice said beside him. Kenji turned to see an elderly woman carrying a bundle of vegetables. She had the weathered hands of someone who had worked hard all her life, but her eyes sparkled with intelligence and humor. "I'm sorry," Kenji said. "You've been standing here for 10 minutes watching Masa make soba," the woman observed. "Most people just order their noodles and leave, but you're studying his hands like you're trying to memorize every movement." Kenji felt his cheeks warm. "I suppose I was curious about the process. I've eaten soba many times, but I never really thought about how it was made." The woman nodded approvingly. "That's the mark of someone with an intelligent mind. I'm Ume, by the way. I run the vegetable stand 2 doors down." "Yamamoto Kenji," he replied, bowing slightly. "Ah, a samurai?" Ume said, noting his formal manner and the way he wore his swords. "What brings a warrior to contemplate noodle making?" Something in her tone, not mocking, but genuinely curious, made Kenji want to answer honestly. "I find myself between positions at the moment," he said carefully. "I'm trying to understand what other paths might be available to me." Ume studied his face for a moment, then smiled. "Come with me," she said. "Let me introduce you to Masa properly. He's always complaining that young people these days have no patience for learning real skills." Before Kenji could protest, Ume had taken his arm and guided him into the soba shop. The interior was small but immaculately clean, with only 4 low tables and the counter where Masa worked. The walls were decorated with simple calligraphy scrolls, and the whole space had an atmosphere of calm efficiency. "Masa," Ume called out, "I've brought you someone who appreciates your artistry." The soba master looked up from his work, his sharp eyes taking in Kenji's appearance in a single glance. "A samurai in my humble shop," he said with a slight smile. "How may I serve you?" "Actually," Ume interjected before Kenji can speak, "young Yamamoto here was studying your technique with great interest. I thought you might enjoy explaining your craft to someone who has the patience to truly listen." Masa set down his dough and wiped his hands on a clean cloth. "Is that so? Well then, Yamamoto-san, what did you observe about my process?" Kenji felt suddenly nervous, but something about Masa's direct gaze reminded him of his old sword instructor, demanding but fair. "You maintain the same rhythm throughout," he said slowly. "Your breathing matches your movements, and you never rush, even when customers are waiting. It seems similar to the discipline required in martial arts." Masa's eyebrows rose slightly. "An interesting comparison. Please, sit down. Let me prepare you some soba, and we can discuss this further." As Masa returned to his work, Kenji found himself drawn once again to the precise movements of the soba master's hands. The way he cut the dough into perfectly uniform strips reminded Kenji of his own sword practice. The same attention to angle, pressure, and timing that separated a master from a novice. "The way of soba," Masa said as he worked, "requires the same dedication as any martial art. The buckwheat must be ground fresh daily. The water temperature must be exact, and the dough must be kneaded just enough. Too little, and it falls apart. Too much, and it becomes tough. Every step demands complete attention." He placed a bowl of steaming soba before Kenji, along with a small cup of dipping sauce. "Please," he said simply. Kenji lifted the noodles with his chopsticks and tasted them. The flavor was unlike any soba he had eaten before. Nutty and complex, with a texture that was both firm and delicate. He found himself eating slowly, savoring each bite in a way he had never done before. "This is extraordinary," he said honestly. "I never realized that soba could be so much more than just food." Masa finished. "Yes, that's what happens when something is made with true skill and respect for the ingredients. Tell me, Yamamoto-san, what brings a samurai to my shop with such troubled eyes The question was asked gently, but Kenji sensed that Masa was the kind of person who saw through polite evasions. "I lost my position today," he admitted. "After serving the Matsudaira clan for 6 years, I find myself without purpose or income." Masa nodded thoughtfully. "And you're wondering what other paths might be open to you?" "I know only the way of the sword," Kenji said. "I've studied military strategy and classical literature, but I have no practical skills that would allow me to earn a living as a common person." "Who told you that serving others through honest work makes you common?" Masa asked, his tone sharpening slightly. "Do you think that because I make noodles for a living, I'm somehow less worthy than a man who carries swords?" Kenji felt his face flush. "I didn't mean to imply." "Peace," Masa said, raising a hand. "I understand that your world has strict hierarchies, and you've been taught that some occupations are more honorable than others. But let me ask you this: which serves society better? A warrior with no war to fight, or a craftsman who feeds hungry people every day?" The question hung in the air between them. Kenji had never considered his role in society from this perspective. He had always assumed that his training and discipline made him inherently valuable, regardless of whether there was actually any fighting to be done. "I've never thought about it that way," he admitted. "Most samurai don't," Masa said with a wry smile. "But these are changing times. The old ways of thinking may not serve you well in the world that's coming." Ume, who had been listening quietly from a nearby table, leaned forward. "Masa," she said, "didn't you say just last week that you're getting too old to handle all the work by yourself?" Masa shot her a look that suggested this was not the first time she had involved herself in his business decisions. "What are you suggesting, old woman?" "I'm suggesting that Yamamoto-san here looks like someone who understands discipline and hard work," Ume replied innocently. "And you could use an apprentice who won't quit after a few weeks when he realizes how difficult the craft really is." Kenji looked between them, hardly daring to hope that they were serious. "You would consider teaching me?" he asked Masa. The soba master studied him for a long moment. "The way of soba is not easy," he said finally. "It requires getting up before dawn every day to prepare fresh noodles. Your hands will be cut and burned from hot water and sharp knives. Customers will complain when their food isn't perfect, and you'll earn barely enough to keep yourself fed and housed. It's not a glamorous life." "With respect, Masa-san," Kenji replied. "The way of the samurai also requires rising before dawn for training. I'm accustomed to discipline and hardship, but are you prepared to bow to customers who treat you as a servant?" Masa pressed. "Can you find honor in work that others might consider beneath your station?" Kenji thought about this carefully. The idea of bowing to merchants and commoners went against everything he had been taught about social hierarchy. But as he looked around the small, clean shop and remembered the taste of the extraordinary soba Masa had prepared, he realized that there was indeed honor in creating something beautiful and nourishing with one's own hands. I believe I can learn to find honor in honest work, he said. If you're willing to teach me, I would be grateful for the opportunity. Masa was quiet for so long that Kenji began to worry he had said something wrong. Finally, the soba master spoke. Very well, but understand this. If you become my apprentice, you will start at the very beginning. You'll sweep floors, wash dishes, and prepare vegetables for weeks before I even let you touch the soba dough. You'll work harder than you've ever worked in your life, for less money than you've ever earned. And if you complain or show disrespect for the craft, I'll send you away immediately. I understand, Kenji said, bowing deeply. Thank you for this chance. Don't thank me yet, Masa said with a slight smile. Come back tomorrow at 4 in the morning, and we'll see if you really understand what you're agreeing to. As Kenji walked home that evening, his mind raced with the implications of what he had just committed to. He would need to sell his better kimono and some of his books to pay for basic living expenses while learning the trade. His swords, which had been the center of his identity for so long, would need to be carefully stored away, as they would have no place in his new life. That night, as he knelt before his ancestor shrine for what might be the last time as a samurai, Kenji found himself wondering what his father would think of his decision. His father had been a proud warrior who had died in service to their lord, and Kenji had always assumed he would follow the same path. But perhaps, he thought, true honor lay not in clinging to old traditions, but in adapting to serve others in whatever way the times demanded. The next morning, Kenji arrived at Crane's Rest at exactly 4 o'clock to find Masa already at work, grinding buckwheat flour by hand in a large stone mortar. The soba master looked up as Kenji entered, noting his simple work clothes and determined expression. Good, Masa said simply. You came. Now let's see if you can stay. The first week was the hardest thing Kenji had ever done. His hands, accustomed to the smooth grip of a sword, were soon covered in cuts from cleaning knives and burns from handling hot water. His back ached from bending over the low work counter, and his knees protested from kneeling on the hard floor for hours at a time. Masa was a demanding teacher who accepted nothing less than perfection in even the smallest tasks. Again, Masa would say, when Kenji's vegetable cuts were uneven. A soba master's knife work must be as precise as a samurai's sword work. If you cannot cut a radish properly, how can I trust you with my noodles? Slowly, painfully, Kenji began to understand what Masa meant about the discipline required for the craft. Every aspect of soba making demanded total concentration and respect for the ingredients. The buckwheat flour had to be sifted to exactly the right fineness. The water had to be the perfect temperature. Too hot, and it would toughen the dough. Too cold, and it wouldn't bind properly. Even the weather affected the process, requiring adjustments to timing and technique that could only be learned through years of experience. But as the weeks passed, Kenji found himself developing a deep appreciation for the subtleties of the craft. He learned to read the texture of the dough by touch, to judge the doneness of noodles by their color and movement in the boiling water, and to present each bowl with the same care that he had once devoted to maintaining his swords. More importantly, he began to understand the relationship between Masa and his customers. The soba master treated everyone with quiet respect, whether they were wealthy merchants or poor laborers. He took pride in serving the best possible meal to each person, regardless of their ability to pay. There was a dignity in this service that Kenji had never recognized before. One evening, after the shop had closed and they were cleaning up for the day, Masa surprised Kenji by asking about his former life as a samurai. "Tell me about your sword training," the older man said, as they wiped down the wooden counter. "What did your master teach you about discipline?" Kenji thought carefully before answering. "He taught me that true mastery comes not from flashy techniques, but from perfecting the basics through endless repetition. He said that a warrior's character is revealed not in moments of glory, but in daily practice when no one is watching." Masa nodded approvingly. "Wise words. And how do you think those principles apply to the way of soba?" "I'm beginning to see the connections," Kenji admitted. "The patience required to knead the dough properly, the precision needed for cutting noodles, the attention to detail in every aspect of preparation. It's all the same discipline, just applied to a different craft." "Exactly," Masa said. "The samurai seeks to serve his lord with honor. The soba master seeks to serve his customers with honor. The form is different, but the spirit is the same." As winter approached, Kenji found his new life settling into a comfortable rhythm. He rose each morning before dawn, not to practice sword forms, but to begin the day's preparation of fresh noodles. His hands, once smooth and soft, were now calloused and scarred. But they moved with growing confidence as he learned each aspect of the craft. The other merchants in the neighborhood had gradually accepted him as one of their own. Ume continued to tease him about his former status, but in a way that suggested affection rather than mockery. The tofu maker next door often stopped by for morning soba and friendly conversation about the weather and local gossip. Even the children who played in the street had grown accustomed to seeing the former samurai kneeling behind the counter, carefully arranging noodles in bowls. It was on a particularly cold morning in late November that Kenji experienced what he would later think of as his moment of true awakening. A young mother had come into the shop with her small son, who was clearly sick with fever. She had very little money, but she ordered a bowl of soba for the child, hoping that the warm broth might help him feel better. As Kenji prepared the order, he found himself thinking not about the technical aspects of the dish, but about the care he could put into it. He selected the finest noodles, made sure the broth was perfectly seasoned, and added a few extra vegetables that he knew would provide nourishment for the sick child. When he presented the bowl, the mother's grateful smile reminded him of something his sword master had once said about the true purpose of martial arts. A warrior's sword exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves, his old teacher had told him. If your blade never serves anyone but your own pride, then you are no true samurai. As Kenji watched the little boy slowly sip the warm broth and begin to look less pale, he realized that he was still serving others, still protecting and nourishing in his own way. The tools had changed, but the heart of service remained the same. Kenji, Masa said quietly from beside him, "You're beginning to understand." "Yes," Kenji replied, not taking his eyes off the mother and child. "I think I am." That evening, as they closed the shop, Masa made an announcement that surprised Kenji. "Tomorrow, I'm going to teach you to make the soba dough from the beginning," he said. "You've mastered all the preliminary skills, and your knife work is finally acceptable. It's time for you to learn the heart of the craft." Kenji felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. For months, he had watched Masa work with the buckwheat flour and water, transforming simple ingredients into something extraordinary through skill and intuition. Now he would have the chance to try it himself. The next morning, Masa guided Kenji through the process, step by step. "Feel the flour," he instructed. "Every batch is slightly different, depending on when the buckwheat was harvested and how it was stored. You must adjust your technique accordingly." Kenji's first attempts were disasters. The dough was too wet, then too dry, then properly mixed, but rolled too thick. His noodles came out uneven and broke apart when he tried to cook them. But Masa was patient, offering gentle corrections and encouragement. "Remember," the master said, "you didn't learn to use a sword in a day. This craft also requires time and persistence." Gradually, over the following weeks, Kenji's technique improved. His noodles became more uniform, his timing more precise. He learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when the dough was ready, when the water was hot enough, when the noodles were perfectly cooked. Most importantly, he learned to taste, not just to check for doneness, but to understand how each element contributed to the final dish. One morning in early spring, Kenji was working alone in the shop while Masa visited his supplier when a group of his former fellow retainers entered. They were clearly uncomfortable in the humble surroundings, and their eyes widened when they recognized Kenji behind the counter. "Yamamoto!" one of them exclaimed. "Is it really you? We heard rumors, but we didn't believe them." Kenji straightened up, suddenly aware of his stained apron and flour-covered hands. "Good morning, Sato-san, Tanaka-san," he said, bowing appropriately. "How may I serve you?" The men exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond to seeing their former colleague in such changed circumstances. Sato, who had always been the most outspoken of the group, finally spoke up. "Kenji, what are you doing here? Surely this is just temporary until you find another position?" "Actually," Kenji replied calmly, "I am learning the way of soba. This is my chosen path now." "But you're a samurai," Tanaka protested. "You can't seriously intend to spend your life making noodles like a common merchant." Kenji felt a flash of his old pride, but then he remembered Masa's words about finding honor in service. "Please," he said, gesturing to a table, "allow me to prepare soba for you. I think you'll find it quite good." The men sat down reluctantly, clearly torn between their desire to help an old friend and their discomfort with the situation. Kenji worked carefully, selecting his best noodles and preparing the broth with extra attention to detail. When he presented the bowls, he knelt beside the table as he had learned to do for all customers. "Please enjoy," he said simply. As his former colleagues tasted the soba, their expressions gradually changed from skepticism to surprise to genuine appreciation. The noodles were perfectly textured, the broth rich and flavorful, and the overall presentation elegant in its simplicity. "This is remarkable," Sato admitted grudgingly. "I've never tasted soba like this." "The secret," Kenji said, "is the same as in swordsmanship: attention to every detail, respect for your tools and materials, and dedication to serving others with excellence." Tanaka looked up from his bowl. "You really mean this, don't you? You're not just hiding here until something better comes along." "This is not hiding," Kenji replied. "This is finding a new way to live with honor. Every day, I help nourish people with food made by my own hands. I serve my community and perfect my craft. How is this different from serving a lord, except that my service reaches more people?" The men finished their meal in thoughtful silence. As they prepared to leave, Sato placed a few extra coins on the table. "For exceptional service," he said quietly. Perhaps you found something worthwhile here after all." After they left, Kenji felt a profound sense of peace. He no longer needed the approval of his former life to know that his current path had value. The way of soba had taught him that honor could be found in any honest work performed with skill and dedication. When Masa returned later that morning, he immediately noticed the change in Kenji's demeanor. "Something happened while I was away," he observed. Kenji told him about the visit from his former colleagues and how he had felt no shame or regret in serving them. "I realized that I am still a warrior," he said, "but now I fight against hunger and indifference instead of human enemies. My weapons are knowledge and skill and care, rather than steel and strategy." Masa smiled approvingly. "Now you truly understand the way of soba. You are ready to be more than just my apprentice." Over the following months, Masa gradually gave Kenji more responsibility in running the shop. He learned to manage supplies, interact with vendors, and handle the business aspects of the craft. More importantly, he began to develop his own style and specialties, adding subtle variations to traditional recipes that reflected his growing understanding of the craft. Regular customers began to request Kenji's special soba, and he took pride in serving dishes that bore his personal touch. While honoring the traditions Masa had taught him, he also began teaching some of the basic techniques to younger apprentices who came to learn the trade, discovering that he had a natural talent for passing on both technical skills and the philosophy behind them. One evening, as cherry blossoms once again began to fall in his small garden, Kenji knelt before his ancestor shrine and reflected on the year that had passed. He was no longer a samurai. in the traditional sense. But he had discovered that the values he had learned in his warrior training, discipline, service, honor, and dedication to excellence, could be applied to any worthy endeavor. His hands were permanently stained with flour and scarred from kitchen work, but they had created countless bowls of nourishment for his community. His back ached from long hours of labor, but his heart was full with the satisfaction of meaningful work. He had less money than he'd ever had as a retainer, but he felt richer in purpose and connection to the people around him. "Thank you, honorable ancestors," he whispered to the shrine, "for giving me the strength to find a new path while honoring the old values. The way of the sword taught me discipline and service. Now, the way of Soba allows me to use those lessons to serve in a time of peace." As he rose from his meditation, Kenji could hear the familiar sounds of his neighborhood preparing for the evening. Children being called in for dinner, shopkeepers closing their stalls, the distant sound of someone practicing shamisen. These were the sounds of daily life, ordinary and precious, that he now had the privilege of being part of in a new way. Tomorrow, he would rise before dawn once again, not to practice sword forms, but to begin another day of creating something beautiful and nourishing with his own hands. And in that daily act of service, he had found a warrior's path that was perfectly suited to his time and place in the world. The samurai who became a noodle master had discovered that true honor lay not in the work itself, but in the spirit with which it was performed. And in the humble soba shop called Crane's Rest, he had found a way to serve his community and perfect his character that was as noble as any battlefield victory. As spring turned to summer and summer to autumn, Kenji's reputation as a soba master grew throughout the district. People came not just for the exceptional quality of his noodles, but for the sense of peace and care that infused every aspect of his service. He had learned that the way of soba, like the way of the sword, was ultimately about dedicating oneself completely to something larger than personal ambition. And in that dedication, the former samurai had found not just a new profession, but a new understanding of what it meant to live with honor in a changing world.